What if the only way to save a city from collapse was not through politics, but through the words of dead poets? Today we are descending into the underworld with Aristophanes to find out. Welcome to Great Digital Library, where we don't simply read the great works of literature. We understand the stories, ideas, and questions behind them. But to understand why Aristophanes searches for answers among the dead, we first need to look at Athens at one of the darkest moments in its history. Athens is exhausted. Years of the Peloponnesian War have drained the city. Political divisions are growing deeper, confidence in its leaders is disappearing, and many Athenians can feel that their once powerful city is moving dangerously close to disaster, but Athens is losing more than battles. One by one, its greatest tragic poets have disappeared as well. Aeschylus has long been dead. Sophocles has recently passed away. And now Euripides is gone too. This troubles Dionysus, the god of wine, celebration, and most importantly for our story, theater. Dionysus has become convinced that there is no longer a living poet capable of writing truly great tragedy. And so he comes up with the kind of solution only a god in Aristophanic comedy could take seriously. He will travel to the underworld and bring Euripides back from the dead. For the journey, Dionysus dresses himself as Heracles. He puts on the famous lion skin, takes up a club, and attempts to look like the legendary hero. The problem is that underneath all this heroic equipment, Dionysus still looks unmistakably like Dionysus soft, extravagant, and not particularly convincing as one of Greece's greatest warriors. He is accompanied by his slave, Xanthias. And from the very beginning, the situation is absurd. The master is dressed as a heroic adventurer, while the slave is the one carrying all the luggage. Xanthias tries to entertain himself with familiar jokes, but Dionysus keeps stopping him. "Those jokes are old," he complains. "The audience has heard them before." And already Aristophanes begins playing with the theater itself. The characters talk about jokes, actors, and audiences almost as if they know perfectly well that they are characters in a comedy. Before entering the land of the dead, Dionysus decides to visit the one person who already knows the way there: Heracles. After all, Heracles once descended into Hades himself and returned alive. But when Heracles sees Dionysus standing before him dressed as a ridiculous imitation of himself, he can barely contain his laughter. There stands the god of theater in a lion skin and carrying a club, while still wearing his elegant clothes underneath. Dionysus explains that he has not come looking for adventure. He has come because he desperately misses Euripides. As far as Dionysus is concerned, there is no tragic poet left among the living who deserves the great Athenian stage. Heracles does not immediately give him directions. Instead, he begins suggesting much faster ways of reaching the dead: a rope, poison, perhaps a good jump from somewhere very high. Dionysus is horrified. He does not want to become one of the dead. He wants to enter the underworld alive, find Euripides, and then return. Eventually, Heracles explains the real route, the same journey he once took when he entered Hades to capture Cerberus. Armed with these instructions, Dionysus and Xanthias finally set out. Behind them lies bright, sunlit Athens. Ahead of them, the road grows darker, stranger, and increasingly uncertain. After a long journey, they arrive at a gloomy lake separating the world of the living from the kingdom of the dead. Through the mist, a small old boat approaches. Its boatman is Charon, the ancient ferryman whose task is to carry the dead across the waters of the underworld. But Charon allows only Dionysus into the boat. Xanthias must walk around the lake because he did not fight in the naval battle of Arginusi. Dionysus assumes that, as an important god, he will simply sit comfortably while Charon rows. Instead, Charon hands him the oars. Dionysus will be doing the rowing himself, and he is terrible at it. He awkwardly struggles with every stroke as the little boat moves deeper into the mist. Then, from the dark marshes around him, something begins to sing, a chorus of frogs. And they greet Dionysus with the most famous sound in the play. Brecakex, coax, coax. The frogs refuse to stop. Their rhythm grows louder and more persistent. Every pull of the oars seems to bring another. Brecakex, coax, coax. Before long, Dionysus loses his patience. His body aches from rowing and the endless croaking is driving him mad. So instead of ignoring them, he joins them. Dionysus begins shouting their own refrain back at them, determined to outsing an entire swamp full of frogs. The crossing turns into an absurd musical competition. On one side, a chorus of frogs. On the other, the god of theater himself, absolutely determined to have the final word. Eventually, Dionysus declares victory. Exhausted but proud, he behaves as if he has just won a great artistic contest rather than an argument with amphibians. At last, the boat reaches the opposite shore. Dionysus climbs out while Charon disappears back into the mist. There, he reunites with Xanthias, who has walked around the lake. But from this point onward, the journey begins to feel different. They have entered the true realm of the dead. Dionysus remembers Heracles' warnings. There may be snakes, wild beasts, terrifying creatures. And suddenly his heroic costume does not make him feel quite so heroic. Then Xanthias stops. Something is ahead of them. He claims it is Empusa, a terrifying demon capable of constantly changing its form. Dionysus freezes. According to Xanthias, the creature changes before their eyes. One moment it looks like a woman, then animal. Then its face seems to burn with fire. Whatever courage Dionysus had disappears instantly. The god dressed as Heracles hides behind his own slave and pushes Xanthias forward to face the danger. Terrified, Dionysus begins calling for help. At one point, he even appeals to his own priest sitting among the theater audience, as though someone watching the play might actually be able to rescue him. But perhaps Empusa was never quite as close as Xanthias claimed. The slave is clearly enjoying his master's terror and may be making the monster sound more frightening with every description. Eventually, the danger disappears into the darkness, and Dionysus immediately straightens himself up and resumes his heroic pose, as though he had never hidden behind Xanthias at all. As they continue, they suddenly hear music, not cries of suffering, not the wailing of the dead. Music, singing, dancing. They have reached the souls of those initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. Unlike the other dead, these souls do not wander miserably through darkness. They celebrate. They sing, dance, and rejoice in their blessed fate. The chorus calls upon Aeschylus, the divine leader of their sacred procession. Their voices fill the underworld, and for a moment this shadowy realm becomes a place of light and celebration. The moment Dionysus hears the music, his fear disappears. As the god of wine, dance, and theater, this is finally something he understands. He happily joins the celebration. But beneath the singing and dancing lies a serious message. The chorus begins attacking corrupt politicians, dishonest leaders, and those who have betrayed the values of Athens. And their criticism is not aimed only at politicians. The chorus also speaks directly to the citizens. Athens, they suggest, must once again trust capable people instead of repeatedly handing power to those who have proved themselves unworthy. When the song ends, Dionysus remembers why he came. He asks the initiated souls where Pluto's palace can be found. Soon Dionysus and Xanthias arrive before the enormous gates of the ruler of the dead. Dionysus is still wearing the lion skin and carrying the club. He gathers his courage. stands like a hero, and knocks loudly on the gate. The door opens. Before them stands Aeschylus, one of the guardians of the underworld. He sees the lion skin and immediately assumes that Heracles has returned. Unfortunately, Aeschylus does not have pleasant memories of Heracles. The last time the hero came to the underworld, he stole Cerberus, the terrifying dog guarding the gates of Hades. Aeschylus promises revenge. He will unleash the monsters of the underworld, snakes, beasts, and everything else capable of tearing this supposed Heracles apart. The moment Dionysus hears this, his heroic confidence collapses. His face changes, his knees weaken, and he quickly comes up with another plan. He tells Xanthias to take the lion skin and the club. From now on, Xanthias can be Heracles. So once again the roles are reversed. Xanthias becomes the hero, while Dionysus takes the luggage and pretends to be the slave. And Xanthias immediately enjoys his new position. Wearing the lion skin and carrying the club, he suddenly walks with all the confidence of a legendary warrior. Then a servant girl comes out of the palace. The moment she sees Heracles, her face lights up. Apparently, Heracles has friends here too. She tells Xanthias that Persephone is delighted that he has returned. A magnificent feast has been prepared. There will be wonderful food, excellent wine. And then she mentions beautiful dancing girls. Dionysus hears this, and suddenly being Heracles does not seem dangerous at all. Now he wants the costume back. Immediately, he orders Xanthias to return the lion skin and the club. After all, Dionysus decides he should clearly be Heracles. So they change identities once again. But Dionysus' happiness lasts only a few moments. Two innkeepers appear. They see the lion skin, and they remember Heracles very well. The real Heracles apparently once visited them, devoured enormous amounts of food, drank their wine, caused trouble, and left without paying. And now at last they believe they have found him again. The women threaten this new Heracles with punishment and demand payment for everything he owes them. The pattern repeats itself. The moment being Heracles brings danger instead of food and dancing girls, Dionysus no longer wants the job. The lion skin goes straight back to Xanthias. Soon Aeschylus appears again. But now Xanthias is dressed as Heracles, while Dionysus insists that he himself is actually the immortal son of Zeus. The confusion becomes complete. Dionysus insists that he is a god. Xanthias happily continues the deception. So Aeschylus devises a simple test. He will beat them both. If one of them is truly a god, surely pain should have no effect on him. The first blow lands on Dionysus. He nearly screams. Then immediately invents an excuse to explain why the sound he just made had absolutely nothing to do with pain. Xanthias receives the next blow. He reacts too, and comes up with an equally ridiculous explanation. Aeschylus continues beating them in turn. Every cry of pain produces another absurd excuse. And by the end of the test, they have proved absolutely nothing. Finally, both men are taken inside Pluto's palace. And there Dionysus discovers that an argument far more serious than his own ridiculous identity crisis is taking place. Euripides has recently arrived among the dead, and he wants the place of honor reserved for the greatest tragic poet in the underworld. There is only one problem. That seat already belongs to Aeschylus, the old master of tragedy, grand, heroic, powerful, and deeply respected. And so begins the conflict that forms the true heart of the frogs. On one side stands Aeschylus, elevated, heroic, and traditional. On the other stands Euripides, questioning, realistic, and determined to challenge almost everything that came before him. Dionysus agrees to judge their contest. But the question is no longer simply, who writes more beautiful poetry? The real question is, who is the greater poet? Euripides attacks first. He accuses Aeschylus of writing tragedies that are too heavy, too grand, and too difficult for ordinary people to understand. He mocks the way characters in Aeschylus' plays might sit silently for what feels like an eternity while the chorus sings enormous passages and the audience waits for the hero to finally speak. And when those characters do speak, Euripides argues they use huge elevated words that may sound impressive, but are almost impossible for ordinary people to understand. Euripides claims that he changed all this. He brought tragedy closer to real life. Instead of presenting distant heroic figures, he gave audiences people they could recognize, people who argue, question, doubt, and search for reasons behind human behavior. "I taught the audience to think" is essentially his claim. Aeschylus has heard enough, and instead of defending individual lines, he asks a much larger question: what good should a poet do for his city? For Aeschylus, the answer is simple. A great poet should not merely entertain. Poetry should make people better, braver, stronger, more worthy of being citizens. He points to his own tragedies, filled with heroic figures, warriors, and people willing to sacrifice themselves for honor, duty, and their city. Then he turns the attack on Euripides. Instead of heroes, Aeschylus argues, Euripides has filled the stage with betrayal, adultery, deception, family scandals, and characters who question every traditional value. The disagreement is no longer simply about literary style. It is about what art is supposed to do. Should art reflect people as they really are? Or should it show them what they ought to become? After arguing about the responsibility of the poet, the contest moves to the poetry itself. Now the two tragedians begin attacking each other's language. Euripides carefully takes apart the opening lines of Aeschylus' plays. Word by word, he searches for weaknesses, contradictions, and anything he can turn into a joke. Aeschylus responds with a trick of his own. He claims Euripides' openings are so predictable that the same ridiculous phrase can be added to almost any one of them. And so, whenever Euripides begins another impressive tragic line, Aeschylus finishes it by adding something about someone having lost his little oil flask. Euripides tries another line. The little flask returns. Another line. Again. The flask. And the more often Aeschylus repeats the joke, the more Dionysus laughs. The two poets then begin mocking each other's choruses and musical styles. Each imitates the other until the grandeur of Greek tragedy has been transformed into pure comedy. And yet Dionysus still cannot choose. Both poets have strengths. Both have weaknesses, so the contest becomes even more ridiculous. Someone proposes that their poetry should literally be weighed on a scale. If they cannot decide whose poetry is better, perhaps they can discover whose poetry is heavier. Euripides recites a line and places it on his side of the scale. Aeschylus answers, and Aeschylus' side drops. They try again. Aeschylus wins again. He cleverly fills his lines with rivers, chariots, death, and other heavy things, making his words literally outweigh those of Euripides. But even after Aeschylus repeatedly produces the heavier poetry, Dionysus still refuses to decide. The games have been entertaining, but they have not answered the question that truly matters. So Dionysus changes the test. He will no longer judge them simply as writers. He asks them something far more important. What advice would they give to Athens? And suddenly the comedy touches the real crisis outside the theater. The Peloponnesian War has lasted for years. Athens is exhausted, politically divided, and approaching defeat. Euripides answers in the way we might expect. Athens must learn to think differently. It must stop blindly trusting the same people and the same failed policies that helped create the crisis in the first place. Aeschylus gives a different answer. Athens, he argues, must once again value capable citizens, discipline, courage, and people willing to place the good of the city above their own private interests. And now Dionysus has nowhere left to hide. There are no more jokes, no more scales, no more tests. He must choose. Only one poet will return with him to the world of the living. And after everything he has heard, Dionysus chooses Aeschylus. He decides that Athens needs the strength, discipline, and moral seriousness represented by the older poet. Euripides is furious. After all, Dionysus came to the underworld specifically to bring him back. But Dionysus has changed his mind. Before leaving, Aeschylus gives his place of honor among the dead to Sophocles, whom he considers a worthy successor. Not to Euripides, Pluto approves the journey. And so Dionysus and Aeschylus leave the kingdom of the dead and begin the long road back to Athens. Perhaps poetry, Aristophanes suggests, can still do something for the city. And that is where The Frogs ends. A comedy filled with disguises, beatings, arguments, ridiculous competitions, and of course, frogs. But beneath all the laughter is a remarkably serious question. What role should art play in society? Should art exist simply to entertain us? Or does an artist also have a responsibility to educate, challenge, and perhaps even improve the society in which they live? And if you had been in Dionysus' place, who would you have chosen? The traditional, heroic Aeschylus? Or the questioning modern Euripides? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to Great Digital Library for more of the world's greatest works of literature retold and explained. Close the book, but keep your mind open. Understanding is only the beginning. See you in the next great work.